I am going to start us off by having everybody do something. I will talk at you a little bit, but it's going to be interactive. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to silently write down the first 10 words that come to mind when you think about assessment. The second thing you're going to do is turn to your neighbor, and you're going to have 3 minutes to share your words with your neighbor. Okay? So one of the key questions in assess, right, is assess what? What should we be assessing? What do we want students to know and be able to do? Most of you are aware of the work that we've been doing around creating a college and career readiness framework and doing an analysis of the research of the last 20 years that has identified what in fact students do need to know and be able to do in order to be ready for success in college and career. And I believe Anna is going to have about 50 copies of that framework available, which you can take on your way out if you don't have a copy of that. But that is a great tool for helping to ground your overall assessment system development conversation, both at the pathway level and at the district level, for what is the end goal of that system. How do we want to prepare students? That is the right place to start. And we know that districts are at varying stages of developing a graduate profile, and in the process of aligning that profile, pathways may be refining and aligning their outcomes using this framework and the associated research as a tool. We also know that pathway teams have been aligning their pathway outcomes to school site ESLers and to the district graduate profiles. And we know that this process of articulation takes concerted effort. It's not easy. Pathways may be ahead of where districts are and having clearly determined what they want students to know and be able to do. And we've also been encouraging districts to focus on one element of the graduate profile, say critical thinking or communication, and to begin to really unpack what does that mean? How do we take it from words on a page to actually a living part of our assessment system? We also have been working with pathways to support them to take those outcomes and to articulate those outcomes throughout their program of study. So once you start with the outcome, then you're doing essentially a process of benchmarking those outcomes back through the grade levels so that you're clear about what a 9th grader should know and be able to do in terms of communication or critical thinking, contextualized within the pathway theme. What a 10th grader should do, what an 11th grader should do, and how those should build, those benchmarks of student progress should build upon each other to reach those outcomes by graduation. And we know that pathway teams have been in the process of trying to connect their projects to those outcome progress benchmarks, so that the projects, which may have been developed independently in isolation from an overall system, get connected to that system. Kind of like putting ornaments on a Christmas tree. Once you actually have developed the tree, or any other analogy you want to use, they are linked to something larger than themselves and not standalone project. You guys are doing great work on this across the district initiative. At Porterville High School, just where I happened to go yesterday, we had a great opportunity to see 3 young women, Samantha, Susanna, and Guadalupe, share their business plan for Sam's Sweets. And there were a whole series of tasks that they had to accomplish, including their budget, their sales forecast, their unique value add, more nutritious, less sugar in their sweets, etc., their risk analysis. And they presented in a very articulate way. In fact, one of the visitors remarked upon how articulate they were in presenting their business plan and asked, how did you become so articulate? They said, well, we practiced. We've practiced a lot. They're intentionally developing those communication skills, and that's a part of the connection to the larger district priority of having clear and effective communicators. Interestingly, as well, their teacher, who was the entrepreneurship teacher, she remarked on the challenging process. I think her name was Mrs. Halaboff, on using the district's rubric that the district had created because it was so generic, taking a very specific project. She actually preferred to use the rubric that was connected specifically to her project because she felt that it was directly responsive to the dimensions of the project that she wanted to assess. So I think a question for district leadership teams to think about is, how do we make that connection between more generic developmental rubrics that are really charting the progress of students across our system toward those key outcomes that we as a system have decided are a priority, and the specific contextualized nature of project assessment? How do we help our teacher teams, our pathway leads, to make those connections and to calibrate so that their project-specific rubrics are actually at the same level of demand or cognitive rigor as where they should be in the grade level progression of our generic rubrics? So that's a question, I think, to ponder how to connect the specific to the generic to ensure equity across the system. So this work is complicated, and the good news is that it gives you a data collection opportunity as you engage with your pathway leads and teachers who are developing these projects and collecting assessment data to help you continue to refine and to tune your assessment system. It will allow you to revise rubrics and will allow the teachers to revise projects. And this is a cyclical revision process. So one of the questions that has come up is this question of balanced assessment. So what do we mean by balanced assessment? Well, what I want to start with is to ask you to think about, what does it mean to you? So I want you to take a minute and just on that second column, just write balanced assessment up there and take a few minutes to just jot down some thoughts or words that come to you. And then you're going to have 3 minutes to discuss that with your partner. What does the term balanced assessment mean to you? What I'm going to do now over the next set of slides is I'm going to draw a contrasting paradigm. And I'm doing this not because I'm leveling judgment on one paradigm or another. I'm doing this to help you all and your teams think about a set of characteristics, potentially a set of design principles that you can consider when you're reflecting on your current assessment practices at the pathway level, the school level, and at the district level, and contemplating potential changes to that system or setting goals around a specific change. And hopefully some of this mirrors what you were talking about in your conversations. So we know that a lot of assessment historically has been discipline-based because of the way that we organize secondary education into disciplines. We also know that within linked learning, we have created opportunities for interdisciplinary assessment, and that interdisciplinary assessment is causing us to have to think in new ways about what students should know and be able to do. And that is one of the impetus for college and career readiness, for example, as an interdisciplinary frame. And what that means is that interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary assessment really requires additional teacher support and professional development and collaboration to be able to do that effectively. We also know that much of our high-stakes assessment is standardized, and it doesn't necessarily mirror the way that knowledge and skill are assessed outside of schools, and that much of those assessments are recall-based and forgotten by students soon afterward. So we know that. It's part of our system, it's part of what we have to grapple with. We have been focusing within the Linked Learning District Initiative on authentic performance-based assessment. Authentic because it more closely mirrors what adults do in the larger world outside, and performance-based because it requires students to do something with the knowledge that they have acquired. We also know that the focus of assessment has and still continues to be generally summative or appraisal at the end. Teachers almost have a natural ability to grade. We don't really know where this comes from, probably from being graded ourselves as students, but it's not something that ed schools spend a lot of time on, frankly, and it's not something that is discussed frequently as part of a professional development agenda. What we do know is that particularly in secondary schools, we have not prioritized attention to formative assessment, that this is an underdeveloped area of teacher knowledge and teacher skill. And so a question is, how do we help teachers become more expert at formative assessment, monitoring learning, adjusting instruction, and providing or facilitating evidence-based feedback for student revision and improvement? What investments are we making in this area as district systems? We also know that most of our high-stakes summative assessments are state mandated, and that really, except for the Casey, while they have high stakes for schools and district systems, they don't really have high stakes for students. I mean, more and more districts are using them for placement decisions, but at the end of the day, they are not specific enough, the test scores coming out of them, to be truly meaningful for students. And we do have high-profile summative assessments, such as course completion data, GPA data, and of course, that diploma as a proxy, as an end-state proxy that are local. But a real question, I think, for us to think about as district systems, as we move towards a more balanced system of assessment is, what locally developed assessments do we have, if any, and how are we holding them up? What kind of profile or visibility or stakes are we giving our locally developed assessment systems in terms of the community? And thinking about how the community perceives many of the state assessments. What are we doing with our local assessments? We also know that much of our assessment systems are score-based. B-, 84, smiley face. That gives students little information. I was recently at a school where there were 10-page papers stapled to the wall with big red letter grades actually written across the top of the writing. And it made me wonder, what kind of message that was sending not only to the students, but about the teacher and the teacher's understanding of assessment. And I think that those are the types of data that districts and site leadership can collect around how are we thinking about scoring. We know that rubrics, on the other hand, demand specific clarity. They drive the design and modeling of exemplars, instruction, formative assessment, and feedback, and ultimately summative assessment. But it becomes a much richer form of summative assessment when it's based upon a rubric. We also know that the private development of assessment and grading are among the least equitable practices in public education. Most impactful to students' future life options, and least engaged by site and district leadership. Now, I know one of the reasons has to do with the ed code language about academic freedom and all that, but this is an avenue for professional development that Connect Ed has prioritized so as to help pathway teams think about the connection in the future between assessment and grading, the high-stakes decisions that are, as we say, frequently private practice. How can we make them common? And how can we create more common tasks that share grading criteria so that there is greater equity in the system? And then lastly, teachers do most of this work in assessment, and we know that they do it themselves. So the teachers are carrying the heavy load of the assessment work. But we know that it's a powerful strategy to have students internalize the criteria for quality. So, and that if they develop the capacity to assess their own work and the work of others, they are going to advance farther. So what kind of opportunities can we create to encourage this type of practice to bring it more into balance in our assessment system? Self-assessment, peer assessment, assessment of student work, and development of criteria. So I call these two paradigms, the one on the left informative, and the one on the right transformative. And the question is not one over the other, but how can we bring these into balance as a comprehensive system of assessment? So here are some strategies I think that districts can do to help advance this process of bringing the system into balance. One is to provide models of well-designed performance tasks and rubrics. To build a real system, districts need to be able to have something to hang that system off of. So creating or adopting a developmental rubric linked to at least one district outcome gives districts a place to start the conversation. It doesn't mean that instantly schools are going to be held accountable for using it, but it gives you a common place to start the conversation, to develop common terminology, to build out from the pathway outcomes and the district graduate profiles that have been established. You can also develop processes and identify resources within your own district to give feedback on rubrics, projects, and tasks. Districts, for example, have a process whereby new courses are typically submitted centrally for review, the course outline. And we know that UCOP has an A to G course approval process. Well, what about rubric review? What about if teachers or teacher teams, pathways have developed rubrics that are specific to projects? What about having them submitted to a representative committee that would look at that specific rubric in relation to the district graduate profile and a more generic developmental rubric, let's say for critical thinking or for communication? This will help ensure that the teacher's expectations are calibrated to where the district believes the benchmark, the progress benchmark, let's say for 10th grade should be, if it's a 10th grade project. You don't want a teacher inadvertently building in an 8th grade expectation level for communication into a 10th grade project because she or he doesn't have any common point of reference. The district can provide that common point of reference for teams. Districts can invest in building teacher leadership to support this work, so pathway leads coming together to discuss this, or teachers who are specializing in assessment having a district-based assessment committee to review some of these strategies. Obviously, support for the community of practice through coaching and instructional coaching to help develop teacher capacity and assessment. These are all areas where the district can help. I also think that the coming Common Core provides us all in linked learning with a great opportunity. I call linked learning and Common Core a marriage made in heaven. And the reason why, I think you can see on the screen. In linked learning, we support deeper exploration of key concepts through robust projects that have deeper complexity. We emphasize higher order thinking skills and the application of knowledge, problem solving. We focus not just on the right answer, but on why the answer is correct or incorrect. We definitely require greater emphasis on informational reading, expository writing, speaking. Think of our presentations. And we also have greater opportunities within pathways to have the type of vertical articulation conversations that very much reflect the type of learning progressions that have been built into the new Common Core standards. So linked learning pathways are incredibly fertile terrain to engage with the Common Core standards early on and to really be a vanguard for districts. What I think districts really need to be vigilant about and to avoid is this siloing of the Common Core standards into a part of the district curriculum and instruction infrastructure that is somehow separated from the linked learning work. I think that is a recipe for disaster. It's perpetuating the old paradigm of academics over here, CTE over here, never the twain shall meet, but thinking really about how can we use this Pathways initiative, particularly within high school, to be a vanguard, piloting ground for the Common Core standards. And that will help actually, as a district, reintegrate those in terms of your organizational structure as well, which I think is critical to the sustainability of linked learning as we enter this new accountability paradigm. And we also know that the relevant nature of projects is going to engage student motivation and help them to persist to address really the higher cognitive demand that is reflected in these Common Core standards. These standards, some of these standards are very rigorous, and if you don't have a relevant context for it, it's going to be hard for students to persist. So we know that we're facing really a situation now where we have an accountability system that is really separated from our assessment system. And this accountability system has grown out of No Child Left Behind. There have been some real positives that have come out of it, particularly the disaggregation of student performance data. I think has been a force for equity. Districts have been forced to confront gaps in student achievement and access. But at the same time, I think we know that there are mixed messages that principals and teachers may be receiving about what is truly important to do. So I think there's a question that really confronts us about how do we create a situation where they're not torn between two lovers, to use the words from an old song, between authentic performance assessment and district accountability, but they actually are integrated. So what I'd like you to do now is to take a minute and to think about this concept of accountability, and then I'm going to give you another minute to chat with your colleague what comes up with you, for you around the term accountability. Okay, so I'm going to do a very similar thing with this concept of accountability. I'm going to contrast two paradigms again to help you think about your own accountability system within your own districts, the messages both explicit and implicit that are communicated at every level of the system. Again, for fodder for your conversation as you think about design and potentially setting goals around developing a balanced system of assessment and accountability. So one of the things that we know about accountability systems as they currently exist frequently is that they are externally owned, institution serving, and vertical or one way. And so what I mean by that is that where do people feel the locus of control around the accountability system? Whether you're a teacher, a principal, a superintendent, where do you feel the locus of control? Do you feel within yourself? Do you feel it external? Whose needs is it serving, the accountability system? Is it serving the needs of the individual and the community? Is it serving the needs of the institution? To what extent? Each of those. And is the accountability paradigm the way in which people think about accountability and look at the words that you wrote down? Is it one way? Is it vertically oriented from teacher to principal to superintendent to state, etc., to Fed, to whoever? Or is it lateral? Is it mutual? Is there a sense that I'm accountable to you, you're accountable to me, I'm accountable to myself, we're accountable to our community? And again, I'm posing contrast for the purposes of discussion. I'm not saying that anybody is sitting exclusively in one paradigm or the other, but if these are dimensions of accountability that we want to think about, this I think poses an interesting contrast, particularly if people want to move in one direction or another in terms of thinking about accountability. I think within a lot of accountability systems, there is a lot of formality and role-based, not necessarily relationship-based forms of accountability. So am I accountable to you because I'm a teacher and you're my principal? Are we accountable to each other because we care about each other and our students and doing better by our students and serving our community? What is the language that is used to articulate the accountability relationship both in people's minds and also in public discourse? Is our accountability system sort of a one-size-fits-all? Or is it more responsive to specific context and to specific needs and challenges and goals? What is the uniqueness around our accountability systems to each individual student or individual practitioner within that system? And how public is it in terms of how it manifests? What I mean by that is the act of accountability, taking a test in private, where their scores are then transmitted and then received back in a private fashion exclusively. Is that how we're defining it? But are there also public dimensions to accountability where we are actually demonstrating what we know and are able to do to people we care about and getting feedback from them and being celebrated for that? And this gets to the next one, sort of what is accountability about reporting information, or is it about exhibiting or demonstrating capacity? And is the dimensions of accountability purely summative? It's really rolled up into something that is given out at the end, and that's the end of the process? Or are there also formative dimensions to that accountability that are really designed to help me reflect and improve and grow as an individual or as a team, as a system. So again, I'm just contrasting what I would call more of an informative paradigm of accountability with what I would call more of a transformative paradigm of accountability. And the question isn't, again, tossing one out for the other. I don't think that's realistic, it's not practical, and it may not even be advisable. It's really thinking about how do we bring these dimensions of accountability more into balance in our practice as individual teachers, learners, as communities of practice, as district systems. So some thoughts again about how districts can help. So protecting the core. Team composition, common planning time, master schedule, cohort purity, these are all, as we know, the necessary conditions. So that's part of the district's accountability for thinking about how does it create those and sustain those conditions for pathways to do the work. That's part of the reciprocal accountability. Public support for innovation and risk-taking, highlighting progress, for example, towards authentic assessment. Some of the great examples that we saw yesterday. Clarifying and aligning assistant superintendent and principal accountability. So we've had many instances where principals have told us, yeah, this is all great, I really want to support this, but I'm being told by my supervisor that I'm responsible for CST. CST is bottom line, it's all about CST. If you don't get CST up, I'm out of a job. So can we as districts think, please, about a more complex message to share with our principals, to help them understand that we're also paying attention to the ways in which they are nurturing the kinds of practice that are reflected in linked learning pathways. And how can we make that part of the accountability conversation and not just part of the professional development conversation as well? So that then principals in turn are empowered to work with their teachers from the same perspective, and teachers again with their students. One example could be to create a waiver process for pacing guides or for benchmark assessments. When I was Chief Academic Officer in Oakland, we developed a curricular flexibility process and policy, and schools could apply to change their calendar, to change their assessment. And the schools, by and large, that did that flourished and showed great progress on traditional assessments as well. There are other examples I know within this room of this type of flexibility, particularly if those are the barriers. It's really a discussion around how does the current assessment and accountability system both facilitate and inhibit progress towards trying to create a more transformative system for kids. Ensure equity and rigor. I think I brought up this suggestion about an assessment committee, about a rubric calibration committee, somebody that can both help individual teachers make that connection to the common rubric, but also ensure equity of rigor and expectation across the system. And then to be clear as well about the district's own learning and capacity building needs, and to share that out so that you're not also, as districts, we're all in this trying to learn together, a certain amount of humility around where we are in that process, and looking to the expertise and the experience of the sites to help inform and understand how districts need to change to better support the pathways. So the goal is really to create a balanced, aligned, and integrated assessment and accountability system that supports that community of practice, that has both the district accountability system and a focus on authentic performance assessment at the heart of that community of practice. So that teachers can internalize this accountability and students can internalize this accountability through local and public ownership of their own work. And we can clearly demonstrate our commitment that every student will graduate college and career ready, as measured by the outcomes that we've set out to describe them, not just proxies like CST and KC. We know that this is not going to be done by individual teachers in isolation. They are not going to take the risk to innovate if they don't have the public and explicit support and permission from district leadership that this is okay to do, and in fact, we want you to do this. We want you to lead the way for us. And this, I told, this is a form of, and here's the word, Kathy, holonomy in the system, where adults are modeling the very practices that they want students to be engaged in: collaboration, reflective practice, learning, public demonstration of knowledge and skill, persistence, joy, holding themselves and each other accountable as adults within the system. We can also then have a better shot of developing that in our students. So I hope that the questions I posed and some of the suggestions that I offered here are going to help you in your discussions and planning. This will be up on Connected Studios if it's of use. I'd be happy to engage with any of you in discussion. And I have been in your shoes, and I know the complexity and the pressure that go against some of the transformation or transformative assessment and accountability practices, but I just want to encourage you to continue this work and to let us know at ConnectEd and our partners how we can better support you to continue to make progress toward developing a balanced system of assessment and accountability.